The invitation to host Thanksgiving dinner had been Mom's idea, though she'd presented it as doing me a favor. "Since you're so proud of your little apartment," she'd said over the phone, "maybe it's time the family saw how you're really living." I should have recognized the trap. In 28 years, my parents had never expressed genuine interest in visiting my home. But I was feeling optimistic about finally having something to show them. A beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Harbor Heights, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, granite countertops, and a view of the harbor that real estate agents called million-dollar worthy. What they didn't know was that I'd been working in property management and real estate investment for the past 4 years, building a portfolio that started with small residential properties and had grown into something substantial. The Harbor Heights apartment wasn't just where I lived. It was part of a larger strategy that they'd never bothered to ask about. Growing up, I was always the family disappointment. My older sister Rebecca was the doctor, my younger brother Kyle was the engineer, and I was the one who never found my direction. When I dropped out of law school to work in real estate, Dad had been devastated. "Real estate," he'd said with the same tone he might use for sewage management. "That's not a career, it's what people do when they can't do anything else." For years, every family gathering included subtle digs about my unstable income and lack of real profession. They assumed I was barely scraping by, working as some kind of rental agent or property showing assistant. I'd stopped trying to explain what I actually did, acquisitions, portfolio management, investment analysis, because their eyes would glaze over. They'd already decided I was the failure, and contradictory evidence just bounced off. But Harbor Heights was different. This was a neighborhood where successful people lived. Doctors, lawyers, executives, entrepreneurs. The kind of people my parents respected. I thought maybe, finally, seeing where I lived would shift their perception of my success. I spent 2 days preparing for Thanksgiving dinner. I bought the expensive organic turkey, the imported wine, the artisanal desserts from the bakery they always mentioned loving. I cleaned my apartment until it sparkled, arranged fresh flowers, and set the table with the good china I'd been collecting. They arrived an hour late, which was typical. Dad immediately started examining everything with the suspicious air of someone looking for evidence of fraud. Mom wandered around touching surfaces like she was checking for dust. Rebecca and Kyle seemed impressed despite themselves, though they tried to hide it. "Nice place," Kyle admitted, looking out at the harbor view. "Must cost a fortune to rent." "Actually, probably splitting it with roommates," Dad interrupted, not looking up from where he was examining my sound system. "Only way someone in your situation could afford this area." I started to correct him, but Mom cut me off. "Where should we put our coats?" "Somewhere that won't be in the way when your roommates come home." "I don't have roommates. I live here alone." Dad snorted. "Sure you do. What are you paying $3,000 a month for?" "That's more than some people's mortgage payments." "I'm not paying rent actually. Subletting then," Rebecca said with authority. "That makes sense. Probably found someone who needed a temporary arrangement." I gave up trying to explain and focused on getting dinner ready. Let them think whatever they wanted. The meal would speak for itself and maybe they'd finally see that I was doing well. But as dinner progressed, their comments got sharper. Dad criticized the wine selection, trying too hard. Mom questioned whether the turkey was really organic or just expensive. And Rebecca made pointed observations about people who live beyond their means. The breaking point came during dessert. I'd bought a beautiful tart from Delacroix Patisserie, the same bakery where Mom always bragged about getting Rebecca's wedding cake. Cost $80, but I wanted everything to be perfect. "This is good," Kyle said, taking a second bite. "Where'd you get it?" "Delacroix Patisserie," I said, hoping Mom would recognize the name. She did. "That place is incredibly expensive. How much did you spend on this dinner?" $1,000. $1,500. I wanted to make it special. "With what money?" Dad's voice got sharp. "You're living in an apartment that probably costs more than I make in a month, buying groceries that cost more than most people's car payments, and you expect us to believe you can afford this?" "I can afford it. My business is doing well." "What business?" Rebecca laughed. "You work for a real estate company. You're an employee, not a business owner." I tried to explain about property investment, about building equity through strategic acquisitions, about how real estate could generate passive income. But Dad was already shaking his head. Real estate investment, he said the words like they tasted bad. You mean flipping houses? Scamming desperate sellers? That's not investing, that's gambling. It's not flipping houses. I buy rental properties and... With what money? Mom demanded. You didn't have any money when you dropped out of law school. You didn't inherit anything. So where did you get the capital for these supposed investments? I could have shown them my portfolio spreadsheets, my bank statements, my property deeds. But something in their tone told me it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided this was all some kind of elaborate scam or delusion. Maybe we should talk about something else, Kyle suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But Dad wasn't done. He stood up and walked to the window looking out at the harbor view. You know what I think? I think you're in debt up to your eyeballs. I think you're renting this place month to month with credit cards, buying expensive food with credit cards, and playing dress up in a neighborhood you can't afford. Dad, that's not. Don't lie to me. His voice got louder. I've seen this before. People who can't handle money getting in over their heads, pretending to be successful until the whole thing comes crashing down. You're headed for bankruptcy and you're too proud to admit it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom was nodding along with everything Dad said. Rebecca looked embarrassed but not contradictory. Kyle was studying his dessert plate like it held the secrets of the universe. I sat there for a moment processing what had just happened. They'd come to my home, eaten my food, enjoyed my hospitality, and concluded that it was all evidence of my moral and financial failure. I'm not in debt, I said quietly. Then prove it, Dad challenged. Show me your bank statements. Show me your income documentation. Show me how someone with your job history can afford to live like this. Before I could respond, he was walking around my living room again, but this time with the demeanor of a detective gathering evidence. He picked up mail from my side table and started reading return addresses. Harbor Heights Property Management, he read aloud. Probably your landlord sending eviction notices. Dad, please don't. Metropolitan Investment Group. Debt collectors, I bet. He was getting worked up now, his voice rising with each piece of mail. City of Harbor Heights Tax Assessment Office. Probably threatening liens on property you pretend to own. Mom joined in, examining my bookshelf. Look at all these real estate books. Property investment strategies, building rental income, real estate portfolio management. She's been reading get-rich-quick schemes. Those aren't get-rich-quick books. They're fantasy, Rebecca said with the certainty that comes from a medical degree. People who actually have money don't need to read books about how to get money. Dad had moved to the kitchen and was opening my cabinets, like he expected to find evidence of my deception hidden behind the cereal boxes. Everything here is too expensive for someone in your situation. The cookware, the appliances, even the coffee maker. You're living a lifestyle that doesn't match your income level. Maybe that's because you don't know what my income level actually is. I know exactly what real estate agents make, he said dismissively. And it's not enough for this. I'm not a real estate agent. I'm a property acquisition specialist and portfolio manager. He waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. Fancy titles don't change reality. You're living beyond your means in a neighborhood where you don't belong, and sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, but because of how confidently he said them. How certain he was that I was failing, despite all evidence to the contrary. You're too broke for this neighborhood, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of my apartment. Stop pretending you belong here with successful people. You're embarrassing yourself and embarrassing this family. Mom nodded emphatically. We didn't raise you to live a lie. Find an apartment you can actually afford and stop this charade before you ruin your credit permanently. I kept eating my dessert quietly, letting their words wash over me. Part of me wanted to pull out my laptop and show them my property management software, my investment portfolio, my monthly revenue reports. But a bigger part of me realized it wouldn't matter. They'd find a way to dismiss or minimize anything I showed them. Are you even listening to us? Rebecca asked. This is serious. You could lose everything. I looked up at her. I'm listening. Then why aren't you responding? Why aren't you defending yourself? Because you've already made up your minds. Dad returned to the table, his face flushed with frustration. We're trying to help you. We're trying to save you from making a mistake that could ruin your life. But you have to be honest with us about your situation. My situation is that I'm a successful property investor who owns multiple rental properties and lives comfortably within my means. That's delusional, Mom said flatly. People like you don't become successful property investors. That takes money, connections, experience, things you don't have. People like me? She gestured vaguely. People who couldn't finish law school. People who've never held a stable job. People who don't understand how money works. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Everyone turned to look toward the entrance. Expecting someone? Cal asked. I wasn't, but I was grateful for the interruption. I'll see who it is. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A middle-aged man in a business suit stood in the hallway, holding a folder and checking his watch. I didn't recognize him, but his professional appearance suggested he wasn't a random visitor. I opened the door. Can I help you, Miss Chin? I'm Robert Martinez from Harbor Heights Property Management. I apologize for stopping by during the holiday, but we had a maintenance emergency in Building C that requires your approval for the repair costs. The contractor needs authorization tonight to start work tomorrow morning. I could hear my family's conversation stop completely behind me. The silence was so absolute that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Of course, I said. What's the situation? Burst pipe in Unit 12C flooded 3 apartments. The water damage is extensive, and we need approval for emergency repairs plus temporary relocation costs for the affected tenants. The estimate is about $40,000 for repairs and another $15,000 for temporary housing. He handed me the folder. As I opened it and reviewed the documentation, I could feel my family's stares boring into my back. This looks reasonable, I said, signing the authorization forms. How long before the tenants can move back in? About 2 weeks if we start tomorrow. I'll coordinate with the insurance adjuster and keep you updated on the progress. Perfect. And Robert? Make sure the affected tenants know we'll cover any additional expenses they incur during the displacement. Hotel meals, laundry, transportation, whatever they need. Will do. Thank you for the quick response, Ms. Chin. Happy Thanksgiving. I closed the door and turned around to face my family. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. Who was that? Dad asked, his voice much quieter than it had been moments before. The property manager for Harbor Heights. Property manager for what? For the building. And the 3 adjacent buildings. The silence stretched out for what felt like minutes. Rebecca was the first to speak. You mean, you manage those buildings? I own them. More silence. Dad sat down heavily in his chair, still holding a piece of mail from my side table. You own this building, Mom said slowly, like she was testing the words. And the one next to it. And the 2 across the street. Kyle leaned forward. When you said you weren't paying rent. I meant I'm not paying rent. It's hard to pay rent to yourself. Dad looked down at the mail in his hand, the envelope from Harbor Heights Property Management that he'd assumed was an eviction notice. What's this then? Monthly revenue reports. Occupancy rates, maintenance schedules, profit and loss statements. He opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper. His eyes moved across the numbers, and I watched his expression change from skepticism to disbelief to something approaching shock. This says monthly rental income of. He stopped and looked up at me. This can't be right. $43,000 in November. It was a good month. We had high occupancy and minimal maintenance costs. Rebecca grabbed the papers from Dad's hands and started reading. Net profit after expenses, $28,000. For 1 month? Like I said, it was a good month. Mom was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was an alien. How long have you owned these buildings? I bought the first one 3 years ago. The others I acquired over the past 18 months as they came on the market. With what money? Dad's question came out as barely a whisper. I started with a small down payment on a duplex in the University District. Lived in one unit, rented out the other. Used the rental income and my salary to save for the next property. Repeated the process, gradually moving up to larger properties with better cash flow potential. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out a folder I kept there. These are the property deeds. Harbor Heights buildings A through D. All owned free and clear as of 6 months ago. Kyle took the folder and started flipping through the documents. Free and clear? You mean no mortgages? The cash flow from the first 3 buildings generated enough income to buy the 4th building outright. Debt-free ownership was always the goal. Dad was still staring at the revenue reports. You make more in a month than I make in a year. Some months are better than others. But yes, the business has been successful. The room fell quiet again. I could see them all processing this information, trying to reconcile their assumptions about my failure with the evidence in front of them. Rebecca was the first to recover. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But every time I mentioned property investment or real estate business, you dismissed it as gambling or get-rich-quick schemes. But you could have shown us documentation, Mom protested. You could have proved you were successful. When would have been a good time to prove myself to people who had already decided I was a failure? At Christmas dinner when you lectured me about finding a real job? At Rebecca's birthday when you introduced me to her friends as the one who couldn't finish law school? At Kyle's graduation when you told people I was still figuring things out? They exchanged glances and I could see the uncomfortable recognition in their faces. They remembered those conversations differently than I did, but they couldn't deny the pattern. Dad set down the revenue reports and looked around my apartment with new eyes. So all of this is paid for with income from my real estate portfolio. The furniture, the art, the kitchen appliances, all purchased with money I earned from properties I own. And dinner tonight was expensive because I wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving with my family. I can afford expensive dinners now. Kyle was still reading through the property deeds. These buildings are worth millions. About $12 million in total according to the most recent appraisals. Mom sat down like her legs had given out. $12 million. The business is worth more than the buildings themselves. The rental income, the long-term leases, the property management contracts. It's a complete real estate operation. Rebecca shook her head slowly. And we just spent 2 hours telling you that you're living beyond your means. And that I'm embarrassing the family by pretending to belong in this neighborhood. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This was the silence of people realizing they'd made a fundamental error, not just in facts but in judgment. I think, Dad said finally, I owe you an apology. You owe me more than that. He looked up, surprised by the sharpness in my voice. You owe me an explanation. You owe me an explanation for why you assumed the worst about me for years. Why you never asked detailed questions about my work. Why you dismissed every attempt I made to explain my business. Why you decided I was a failure and then interpreted everything I did through that lens. Mom started to say something but I held up my hand. I dropped out of law school because I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. But instead of asking me what I did want to do, you decided it meant I was directionless. I started working in real estate and instead of asking me to explain the industry, you assumed it was a dead-end job. I bought my first property and instead of congratulating me, you warned me about getting in over my head. Rebecca cleared her throat. We didn't understand. You didn't want to understand. Understanding would have required admitting that maybe I knew something you didn't. Maybe the family disappointment had actually found something she was good at. I walked to the window and looked out at the harbor view, the same view Dad had been admiring earlier while telling me I couldn't afford to live here. Do you know what the hardest part has been? Not building the business. That was just work. The hardest part has been succeeding while my own family was rooting for me to fail. Do you know how isolating it is to achieve something you're proud of and have nowhere to share that pride? Kyle set down the property deeds. We weren't rooting for you to fail. Weren't you? Every family gathering, you all seemed disappointed that I wasn't struggling more. Like my success was somehow inconvenient for the narrative you'd created about me. Dad was staring at his hands. We were worried about you. We thought you were making poor decisions. Based on what evidence? Based on actually looking at my financial situation? Based on asking detailed questions about my business model? Or based on the assumption that because I didn't follow your prescribed path, I must be failing? The questions hung in the air unanswered. Because the truth was they'd never looked for evidence. They'd made their assumptions and stuck with them, filtering everything through their preconceptions. Mom wiped her eyes and I realized she was crying. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 4 years of being treated like the family charity case. Sorry doesn't give me back the family support I needed when I was building this business. Sorry doesn't erase the constant stress of knowing that my own parents thought I was a failure. Robert Martinez knocked again and I went to answer it. He handed me another set of documents. Emergency repair approval for Building D, he explained. HVAC system failure. We need to replace the entire unit before tomorrow or the tenants will be without heat over the weekend. I reviewed and signed the authorization for another $15,000 in repairs. After he left, I turned back to my family. That's how my business works, I said. Problems come up, decisions need to be made quickly and tenants depend on me to solve them. It's not gambling or get-rich-quick schemes. It's real business with real responsibilities. Dad stood up and walked over to me. Can you forgive us? I looked at him for a long moment. I can forgive you, but I can't forget how this felt. And I can't pretend that everything goes back to normal now that you know I'm successful. What does that mean? It means that maybe we need to rebuild our relationship from scratch. Maybe you need to get to know who I actually am instead of who you assumed I was. Rebecca joined us by the window. We'd like that. We'd like to know who you really are. I smiled for the first time all evening. I'm someone who owns 4 apartment buildings and makes more money in a month than most people make in a year. I'm someone who employs 12 people and provides housing for over 200 families. I'm someone who built a business from nothing and now has enough financial security to afford $80 desserts without thinking twice. And, Kyle added, reading from one of my business cards he'd found on the side table, you're the CEO of Harbor Heights Property Group. I'm also someone who invited her family for Thanksgiving dinner because she wanted to share her success with the people she loves. Even when those people spent the evening telling her she was living beyond her means. We stood there looking out at the harbor as the sun set over the water. The view really was worth millions, I should know since I'd had it appraised. Can we start over? Mom asked quietly. We can try. Dad picked up one of the property deeds again. Would you be willing to tell us about your business? Really tell us, I mean. Help us understand how it works. I'd like that. And for the first time in years I meant it. The validation felt good, but what felt better was the possibility that maybe, finally, my family might see me for who I really was instead of who they'd decided I should be. Later that evening, after they'd left, I stood in my apartment. My apartment that I owned, in my building that I owned, in my neighborhood where I definitely belonged, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time with my family. I felt proud.
These aren't real children. They don't belong in our family. Sarah's voice cut through the courthouse hallway like a blade. The doors slammed behind her, the sharp echo lingering in the air. My children flinched at the sound, and I tightened my hold on them, my arms a shield against the cruelty that had just stormed out. I'm Olivia, and at 34, I was finally about to become the legal mother of the 2 most extraordinary children in the world, 10-year-old Maya and 8-year-old Lucas. After 3 years of fostering, today was supposed to be our happiest day. Instead, my sister-in-law had made it her mission to poison it. Mom? Maya's voice was small, uncertain, as she looked up at me, her dark eyes filled with questions no child should have to ask. Does Aunt Sarah hate us? I swallowed the fury rising in my throat. Not today. Don't let her take this day from them. No, sweetheart, I said softly, forcing warmth into my voice. Aunt Sarah just doesn't understand what family really means. Tom's hand found my shoulder, his grip firm with restrained anger. His jaw was tight, his breath measured. I'll talk to her, he muttered, already turning toward the door. I caught his arm. No, stay. My voice was steady, absolute. Your sister's drama isn't worth missing this moment. Today is about us, our family. The judge, who had witnessed the entire ordeal, offered a small, sympathetic smile. Shall we continue? We stepped back into the courtroom, but Sarah's words clung to me like a shadow. They weren't new. For years, she'd had questioned our decision to foster. Why can't you just have your own kids? She asked at family gatherings, as if Maya and Lucas weren't right there, hearing every word. They're not blood. They'll never truly be part of us. But Sarah didn't know our story. She didn't see the way Maya clung to me during thunderstorms, whispering about the parents she barely remembered. She didn't hear the pure joy in Lucas's voice when he called Tom Dad for the first time. She didn't witness the quiet moments, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees I kissed better, The whispered I love yous in the dark. She didn't see how we had already become a family. And now the law was about to make it official. When the judge finally declared Maya and Lucas ours, a tear slipped down my cheek. No more waiting. No more temporary. No more fear of losing them. They were my children. Forever. That night, we celebrated with Tom's parents, our true family. But while we laughed over cake and presents, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. These kids will never truly be family. What will people think? Mom and Dad deserve real grandchildren. I showed the messages to Tom's parents. Martha read them in silence, her expression hardening. James sighed, rubbing a tired hand over his face. I don't know where we went wrong with Sarah, Martha murmured before pulling Maya and Lucas into a fierce hug. But these are our grandchildren, and we couldn't be prouder. James ruffled Lucas's hair. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. And this room is full of it. The kids beamed, but I saw the weight of Sarah's words still lingering in their eyes. That night, after tucking them in, I sat with Tom, my composure finally breaking. I can take Sarah's hatred toward me, I whispered, but I won't let her hurt our children. Tom's arms wrapped around me, his voice fierce. She won't. If she can't accept Maya and Lucas, that's her loss, not ours. But I had no idea then that Sarah wasn't done. Her outburst at the courthouse was only the beginning. She was about to unleash a storm that would shake our family to its core. But what she didn't realize was that in trying to tear us apart, she was setting the stage for something none of us could have seen coming. And the lesson she was about to learn? It would change everything. 2 weeks after the adoption ceremony, Sarah launched what could only be described as a campaign against our family. It started with cryptic social media posts questioning the authenticity of adoptive families, thinly veiled attacks that left no doubt about whom she was targeting. Then came the family dinner at Tom's parents' house. I'd hesitated to go, my instincts warning me against it, but Martha had insisted. Don't let her drive you away. This is your family, too. I should have trusted my instincts. Sarah arrived with photo albums, spreading them across the dining room table with exaggerated care. Look at all these beautiful family memories, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. So many generations of our bloodline. It's important to preserve our real family history. Across the table, Maya and Lucas sat still, their forks idly pushing food around their plates. The glow of excitement they carried since the adoption had dimmed, replaced by quiet uncertainty. I opened my mouth, ready to put an end to Sarah's performance, but Martha beat me to it. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's enough, Sarah. Her voice was sharp, final. She began gathering up the albums, snapping them shut with purpose. If you can't see the love in this family, then maybe you need to ask yourself why. Sarah's face flushed. I'm just trying to protect our family legacy, Mom. These children, James cut in, his usually gentle voice edged with steel, are our grandchildren. And right now, they're showing more maturity than you are. Silence fell over the table. Sarah, stiff with indignation, pushed back her chair and stormed out. Again. But the damage was already done. That night, I found Maya on the floor of her bedroom, her artwork torn to shreds around her. I knelt beside her, my chest tightening. Sweetheart, why are you tearing up your drawings? She wouldn't look at me. They're not beautiful, she whispered. They're not real art. Just like I'm not a real daughter. My heart shattered. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she trembled. Maya, listen to me. I lifted her chin, making sure she met my eyes. You are real. Your art is real. Your place in this family is real, and no one gets to tell you otherwise. The next morning, I made a decision. I called Dr. Anderson, the children's therapist, and arranged for extra sessions. What I didn't expect was what she would suggest during our parent consultation. Your children are incredibly resilient, Dr. Anderson said, scanning her notes. But they've shared something interesting. They want to help other foster children understand that they deserve families too. She explained that Maya and Lucas had expressed a desire to create something to help other kids feel less alone. The idea started small. Maya, always artistic, began illustrating a comic book about her journey from foster care to adoption. Lucas, a natural storyteller, helped write the narrative. They called it Hearts Find Home. Then something unexpected happened. The school counselor asked if they could share their comic with other foster children in the district. Soon, Maya and Lucas were invited to speak at a local community center. I watched awestruck as my children stood in front of a room full of foster kids and shared their story with courage beyond their years. Maya held up her drawings, explaining how art helped her process big emotions. Lucas spoke about how terrifying it had been to trust a new family, but how worth it had been. Family isn't about blood, Maya said, her voice gaining strength. It's about love. It's about choosing each other every day. A little girl in the audience raised her hand. But what if someone says you're not a real family? Lucas didn't hesitate. Then they're wrong. His voice was steady, sure. Love makes a family real. And sometimes the family that chooses you is more real than the one you're born into. I recorded the whole thing, planning to share it with Tom when he got home from a business trip. But before I knew it, the video had made its way to Martha, who shared it with her church group. From there, it spread. Local news picked up the story. Messages poured in from other adoptive families, sharing their own struggles and triumphs. Maya and Lucas's simple comic book had sparked something powerful. And then there was Sarah. For the first time in weeks, her social media fell silent. She missed the next family dinner, sending only a short text. Not feeling well. We later learned from Martha that Sarah had seen the video of Maya and Lucas speaking. What we didn't know then was that Sarah was facing her own hidden battles, ones that would force her to confront her prejudices in a way none of us could have predicted. But for now, watching my children transform pain into purpose, I realized something. The best revenge against cruelty is to create something beautiful from it. Maya and Lucas were no longer victims of Sarah's narrow definition of family. They were advocates. They were turning their story into a light for others. And in doing so, they were healing themselves. That night, as I tucked them into bed, Maya looked up at me. "Mom, do you think we helped those kids today?" I smoothed her hair, smiling. "I know you did, sweetheart." From across the room, Lucas yawned. "Maybe even Aunt Sarah will understand someday." Little did we know that understanding would come far sooner than we ever expected, and in a way that would change our family forever. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a month after Maya and Lucas's presentation at the community center. I was at the kitchen table helping Maya with her homework when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found Sarah standing there, rain-soaked and trembling, her mascara streaked down her face. "I need your help," she whispered. Her usual sharp confidence was gone, replaced by something raw, almost unrecognizable. I don't know who else to turn to. I hesitated, instinctively protective of my family, but there was something in her eyes, something fractured, desperate, that made me step aside and let her in. Maya and Lucas, hearing their aunt's voice, hovered near the doorway, watching cautiously. Sarah took a shaky breath and finally told us why she was here. She had been volunteering at a children's hospital, a personal mission to prove to herself that her views on adoption were justified. But instead of reinforcing her beliefs, the experience had shattered them. That was where she met Sophie, a 6-year-old girl abandoned at the hospital by her birth mother, with no family and nowhere to go. "She has no one," Sarah said, her voice breaking. And all I can think about is how I treated Maya and Lucas. How I tried to deny them a family because of my own stupid prejudices. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Maya, always the first to forgive, stepped forward. "Is Sophie alone at the hospital now?" Sarah nodded, dabbing at her eyes. "The nurses take turns staying with her after their shifts. She reminds me so much of you, Maya. She draws all the time." Lucas, quiet until now, finally spoke. "Maybe we could visit her. Show her our comic book." I watched as Sarah's face crumpled at my son's kindness. Kindness she had not earned but so clearly needed. "I'd like that," she whispered. And so, our family began making regular visits to Sophie's hospital room. Maya brought art supplies, patiently teaching Sophie how to sketch. Lucas read to her from his favorite books, his animated storytelling pulling laughter from a child who had known too much sadness. And Sarah began to change. It happened in small but undeniable ways. The way she gently defended Maya to a nosy nurse who questioned our family ties. How she beamed with pride when Lucas got an A on his school project, calling him her nephew without hesitation. The way she lingered by Sophie's bedside, brushing the little girl's hair back the same way I had done for Maya countless times. One evening, as we were leaving the hospital, Sarah pulled me aside. "I was wrong," she said simply, "about everything. Watching you with Maya and Lucas, seeing how they've opened their hearts to Sophie despite how I treated them, I've learned what family really means." But the real shock came 2 months later. Sarah had started the process to become Sophie's foster mother, with the intention of adopting her. "I don't deserve your help," she admitted one evening over coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug as if for warmth. "But Sophie deserves a family, and I want to do this right." Maya and Lucas threw themselves into helping their aunt prepare for Sophie's arrival. They decorated her bedroom, shared their experiences, and even created a special welcome comic book just for their new cousin. And then, finally, the day came. When Sophie walked into Sarah's home for the first time, she found our entire family waiting to welcome her. Martha and James beamed, their pride unmistakable. Tom stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, watching his sister finally understand what we had known all along. And Maya and Lucas, standing proudly, presented Sophie with their special comic book, one about finding your forever family. "See?" Maya pointed to a page. "Sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other." Sophie looked up at Sarah, her small hand gripping her new mother's tightly. "Like you chose me?" Sarah's throat worked as she nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, just like that." Later that night, after the children had settled in, Sarah approached me on the porch, staring out into the yard where Maya, Lucas, and Sophie played under the glow of the porch light. "I owe you an apology," she said, "but I'm sorry doesn't seem like enough." I met her gaze. "You're right," I said. "It's not enough. But watching you open your heart to Sophie, watching you become the kind of mother she needs, that means something. Actions speak louder than words, Sarah." She swallowed hard, nodding. Yesterday, Sophie asked if she could call Maya and Lucas her cousins. "Real cousins," she said. And I realized they've always been real. I was the one who wasn't seeing clearly. Today, our family gatherings look very different from that tense, painful day at the courthouse. Sophie has blossomed under Sarah's care, her artistic talents thriving with Maya's encouragement. Lucas, ever the protective older cousin, has taken her under his wing, teaching her the important things: how to build the best blanket fort, how to sneak an extra cookie from Grandma Martha's hidden stash. And Sarah? Sarah has become one of the strongest advocates for adoptive families in our community. The photo albums she once used to divide us are now filled with pictures of all our children, celebrating the family we have built, not through blood, but through love. One afternoon, as I sip tea on the porch, Maya calls out to me from the backyard. "Mom, come look at what we made." I step outside to find all 3 children proudly displaying a new family portrait they'd drawn together. In it, we stand united, no divisions, no doubts, just love. And that really is the most beautiful ending we could have hoped for. "You're just imagining things," Margaret cooed, patting my hand with mock concern. Her touch was light, but beneath it, I felt the weight of something darker. I sat at her pristine dining table, my head throbbing, my vision blurring. My blood sugar numbers made no sense, wild swings despite my meticulous management. Something was wrong. Deeply, terrifyingly wrong. My name is Olivia Parker. I'm 34 years old, and I've been managing my type 1 diabetes for over 2 decades. I know my body. I know when something isn't right. And ever since moving closer to my in-laws 6 months ago, my readings have been erratic. Dangerous even. "Maybe you're just stressed," Margaret suggested smoothly, sliding a cup of tea toward me. "All this obsessing over numbers can't be good for you. You know, my friend's daughter cured her diabetes with essential oils." I forced a smile, though my smartwatch buzzed another urgent warning against my wrist. Margaret had never approved of me, the woman who had trapped her precious son with a chronic illness. As if I had chosen this. As if I hadn't told James everything when we started dating 5 years ago. "I've been managing my diabetes for 20 years, I said, keeping my voice even. "I know when something is wrong." Margaret's lips tightened, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Well, if you just try some of my natural remedies instead of all those harsh chemicals." I barely heard her. My fingers were already checking my glucose monitor again. The numbers didn't add up, not for the insulin I had taken, not for the food I had eaten. And then, as I glanced up, I caught something. Margaret was watching me, closely, her gaze sharp, calculating. The first real suspicion had come 2 weeks ago when I'd stayed at her house while James was away. She insisted, claiming she worried about me being alone with my condition. My levels had been a disaster during that visit, but the moment I returned home, they stabilized. Then it happened again, at Sunday dinner, and now after using the insulin she kept at her house just in case. The insulin she had insisted on keeping, my numbers were spiraling again. "More tea?" she asked, already reaching for my cup. I hesitated, watched her, noticed the slight tremor in her hand, the way she avoided my eyes. "No," I stood abruptly. "I should get home. I need to check my backup insulin." "Don't be silly," she said quickly, too quickly. "You just took your insulin here. And you know what the doctor said about driving when your sugar's unstable." I hadn't told her about my last doctor's visit. My smartwatch buzzed again. Another spike. Another red warning flashing across my screen. And then I saw it, the pattern. Every erratic reading traced back to one thing. Margaret. "I've been tracking everything," I said quietly, pulling out my phone. "Every dose, every meal, every visit. Would you like to see the pattern?" Margaret paled. "You and your gadgets. In my day, we didn't need all this technology to stay healthy." "In your day," I said, "a lot of diabetics didn't survive." I grabbed my purse, heart pounding. I had to get home, had to check my supplies. But as I turned toward the door, something caught my eye. The kitchen trash can. An empty glucose tablet container. The same brand I kept in my emergency kit here. Margaret stepped in front of me, blocking the way. "I'll walk you out," she said, too eager, too tense. But I was already moving, past her, toward the kitchen drawer where she kept my emergency insulin. The sight that greeted me turned my blood to ice. Empty insulin cartridges, glucose tablet bottles, their seals broken. One still dusted with fine powder, refilled with something else. "What are you doing?" Margaret's voice shot up an octave, sharp with panic. "That's private property." "Private?" I turned, holding up an empty insulin cartridge. "Like my medication is private." "What did you do, Margaret?" "Switch my insulin with saline. Replace my glucose tablets with sugar pills." Her face twisted. "I was trying to help," she snapped. "If you just get sick enough, maybe you try real cures instead of all these toxic chemicals. Then James wouldn't have to worry about having sick children." The room tilted, not from my blood sugar, from the sheer, cold calculation of it. My phone was already in my hand, the health app open, displaying the undeniable proof. The spikes, the crashes, the deliberate sabotage. "I've been documenting everything," I said, my voice eerily steady. "And now I have proof." Margaret's expression hardened. "No one will believe you. You're just an unstable diabetic who can't manage her own condition. Who do you think James will trust? His loving mother or his pharmaceutical-dependent wife?" A strange calm settled over me. I pressed a button on my phone, stopping the recording. "Why don't we ask him?" I said quietly. And then from the doorway, a sound. The front door closing. James stood there, pale, his phone in his hand, open to the emergency alert I had set up weeks ago. The one that triggered when my levels became dangerous. Margaret's mask shattered. "James." Margaret's voice shot up, brittle with panic. "I can explain everything. I was just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" James stepped into the kitchen, his expression a storm of betrayal and disbelief. "By tampering with Olivia's medication? By risking her life?" I gripped the counter, my phone still recording, my smartwatch vibrating another urgent alert against my wrist. James saw the numbers flash on the screen and immediately moved to my side. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said, his arm steady around me. "Your levels have been all over the place for the last hour." "No." Margaret lunged toward the door, blocking our way. "She's manipulating you, James. She's faking these readings, trying to turn you against me. I'm your mother." I forced my shaking hands to steady as I pulled up my health app. "Look at the pattern, James," I said, my voice low but firm. "Every dangerous spike coincides with visits here. Every irregularity happens after I take insulin from the supply she insisted on keeping." James took my phone, scrolling through the data. His face darkened as he read my careful notes. Dates, times, symptoms, photographic evidence of my medication before and after it was in Margaret's care. "The timestamps," he murmured, his jaw tightening. "The photos. The pattern. His gaze snapped back to his mother. What did you do? Margaret's composure fractured further. I did what any loving mother would do. That insulin she takes, it's poison. I was trying to show her there are natural alternatives. If she had just gotten sick enough to try them. Sick enough? James's voice sharpened with fury. She could have died. Do you even understand that? Diabetes isn't some minor inconvenience you can cure with essential oils and wishful thinking. It's a medical condition that requires actual treatment. The room tilted, not from my blood sugar, but from the weight of her words, the full, awful realization of what she had been willing to risk. James caught me as my knees wobbled, his grip sure, steady. He checked my glucose monitor, his medical training taking over even as rage burned behind his eyes. We're leaving, he announced, his voice cold, final. And we're taking Olivia's compromised medication as evidence. Margaret went pale. Evidence? Evidence for what? For the police, I said quietly. Tampering with prescription medication is a felony, Margaret. Did you know that? She let out a high, brittle laugh. You wouldn't dare. I'm family. Family doesn't try to kill family. James shot back, already gathering the empty insulin cartridges and altered glucose tablets. Family doesn't swap out life-saving medication with placebos. I kept the originals, I added, watching her reaction closely. Untouched. The lab can compare them. My endocrinologist has already flagged my erratic readings. Margaret's mask cracked completely, raw desperation bleeding through. Everything I did for you, James. She trapped you with this illness. Any children you have could be sick too. I was trying to free you. Free me? His voice was ice. By slowly poisoning my wife. By playing God with her life because you refused to accept reality. Margaret's face twisted with something ugly. She's made you weak, she spat. The James I raised would understand that sometimes difficult choices must be made for the greater good. A sick chill ran through me. The greater good? I echoed, still recording. Like committing a felony? Like risking someone's life because you don't approve of their medical condition. James was already on the phone, explaining everything to my endocrinologist. Through the speaker, I heard the doctor's alarmed response, insisting I come in immediately for evaluation and documentation. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. If you leave with her, she said, her voice shaking with fury, if you do this to your own mother, don't expect to be welcomed back into this house. James hung up and met her gaze. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as the mother who had raised him, but as the woman who had nearly cost his wife her life. If Olivia had died because of you, he said, his voice hollow with restrained rage, welcome would be the least of your concerns. I took a breath, steadying myself. I saved everything, I told her. Every reading. Every text where you insisted on keeping my medication here. Every photo of the tampered supplies. The police will have everything they need. Margaret's expression collapsed into disbelief, then fury. You planned this? You trapped me. No, Margaret, I replied as James guided me toward the door. I protected myself. There's a difference. As we stepped outside, her voice followed us, desperate, shifting between threats and pleas. But James never looked back. His grip on me was firm, unyielding, as he helped me into the car. My smartwatch buzzed one final warning, another dangerous blood sugar alert. But for the first time in months, I knew exactly why my levels had been erratic. And more importantly, I had the proof to end it. The drive to the hospital was quiet, heavy with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. James held my hand the entire way, his fingers curled tightly around mine, as if he could anchor me to something safe. I knew this wasn't over. The fallout would ripple through our lives for years. But as Margaret's house disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt something else settle deep in my chest. Vindication. The hospital moved fast once we arrived. My endocrinologist, Dr. Santos, was already waiting, her expression grim as she scanned my glucose readings from the past 6 months. The lab confirmed what we suspected. Margaret had tampered with my insulin, replacing it with saline. The glucose tablets she provided? Nothing more than sugar pills. You could have died, Dr. Santos said bluntly, looking up from my charts. If you hadn't documented everything, if you hadn't tracked your symptoms so carefully, this could have ended very differently. I swallowed hard, feeling James's hand tighten around mine. That evening we gave our statements to the police. Detective Martinez listened intently, her expression hardening as she played back the recording of Margaret's confession. The evidence was undeniable: my meticulously tracked health data, the altered medication, the text messages, and most damning of all, Margaret's own words. "This is clear-cut medical tampering," Martinez said. "Your mother-in-law will be facing serious charges." In the weeks that followed, our world shifted. James's family fractured. Some rallied around Margaret, insisting she had simply been a well-meaning mother who had gone too far. Others were horrified, reaching out to offer support, shaken by the realization of what she was capable of. Late one night, James's sister Elena called. Her voice trembled. "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted. "Mom did something similar when I was in college. My friend had severe allergies and Mom kept insisting she was just being dramatic. She switched her antihistamines with vitamins. We all thought it was just Mom being Mom." The charges against Margaret were swift and severe: multiple felony counts of medication tampering and reckless endangerment. But she refused to take accountability, choosing instead to paint herself as the victim. "She set me up," Margaret wailed at her first hearing. "She recorded me without my knowledge. She trapped me." Her own lawyer let out a weary sigh. "No, Mrs. Mitchell," he said flatly. "She protected herself, and given your actions, she was absolutely right to do so." Through it all, James never wavered. He cut ties with his mother completely, pouring his energy into my recovery and making sure I was safe, physically, emotionally, medically. We moved farther away, starting fresh in a place where I could manage my health without interference. 6 months later, Margaret accepted a plea deal. 2 years of house arrest, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, no contact with me or any of my medical providers, a legal ban on giving medical advice or handling anyone else's medication. "It's not enough," James said when we heard the terms. "After what she did to you." But I exhaled, feeling something settle inside me. "She's exposed now," I said. "Everyone knows what she's capable of. She can't hurt anyone else like this." We moved forward, rebuilding our lives. I became an advocate for medical autonomy, sharing my story with support groups. The more I spoke, the more I realized I wasn't alone. Stories of family members interfering with life-saving treatment, of medical abuse disguised as concern, were more common than I had ever imagined. My health stabilized under my own control. Dr. Santos helped refine my tracking systems, though she often reminded me, "Your attention to detail saved your life. Never let anyone make you doubt what you know about your own body." A year later, I received a letter from Margaret's psychiatrist. She wanted to arrange a supervised meeting as part of Margaret's therapy. I didn't hesitate. I declined. "Some bridges," I told James, "once burned should stay that way." He pulled me into a tight hug, no words needed. We had built something stronger from the wreckage, a life anchored in trust, in respect, in the unwavering knowledge that we would protect each other at all costs. My smartwatch still buzzes with glucose alerts, but now they're predictable, manageable. Each reading isn't just data, it's proof. Proof of my control, my resilience, my survival. Margaret tried to make my illness a weakness, a means to control me. But in the end, it was my knowledge of my own body, my relentless insistence on documenting the truth that exposed her. She wanted my story to end in tragedy. Instead, I turned it into a testament to strength.